Hi all, welcome to Chapter 9 about personal identity. The focus questions for this chapter are: what roles does communication play in developing personal identity? How do others shape personal identity? What types of communication affect your understanding of who you are? And how can you create a supportive context for your personal growth? As we go through an overview concepts for this chapter, I'll also ask you to stop several times and think about how these concepts apply to your own life. And we'll start off with that. So, within your notes, start a paragraph. And how do you define yourself? Right, so think about the concepts that you've read in the chapter and tell me, what is your life script? What messages did you receive as a child to construct or to reinforce this message? And what messages do you still receive today that shape your personal identity? So some key concepts to think about how to use: attachment styles, reflected appraisal, direct definition, generalized other, life script, self-sabotage, self-fulfilling prophecy, self-disclosure, particular others, and any others from the chapter. You don't have to use all of these, but this is a good reminder of how can you apply concepts to your own life. As I've mentioned before, using examples for the concepts is a good way to remember how they're used and to work on seeing how they function in life. So pause, take some time in your notes, and write a paragraph about how you define yourself. So as we talk about self-perception, now that you've finished your personal reflection, what is the self and how is it formed? According to Wood, the self is an ever-changing system of perspectives that is formed and sustained in communication with others and ourselves. We have two different concepts here at play: the particular other and the generalized other. And this comes from George Herbert Mead, and he argues that particular others are those particular, specific people who we care about in our lives: family, friends, people we respect. Generalized other is big picture society, and we have a lot of information, and society influences how we think about ourselves significantly, even when it's not a particular person we have in mind. Some other major aspects that affect how the generalized other perceives us, but also how we perceive ourselves, are things like race, gender, ethnicity, religion, ability, sexuality, socioeconomic status, language. There's so many pieces here that affect our sense of self. And we also have this idea of self-concept. So not just self-perception, but self-concept. So self-concept is as you develop a perception of yourself and you socially construct a description of self, right? So how do I actually say this is who I am? We also have something called perceptual distortion, which is unfortunately when people perceive themselves in ways that are inaccurate to reality. And there are some ways we're trying to fight this. So, for instance, they've found in studies that people with anorexia, so often young women, believe that they are much larger than they physically are. And researchers have found when these women are asked to go through doorways, they will actually turn and try to wedge themselves through doorways even as they are physically really underweight, but they don't perceive their bodies in that same way, so their perception is distorted. And we have one of the major issues with this is depictions of women in the media in particular. And so Spain, for instance, in 2006, passed a rule that any models that were going to be on the public catwalk had to be the size of at least the average woman in their society. And so any catwalk models in Spain, modeling clothes or whatever, especially if they're going to be aired on television, have to be at least the average size, which is very different than in the US, where most models are significantly thinner and in very unrealistic sizes for most average size women. I know there's many women whose bodies cannot reach the size and the proportions that runway models in the US have. So Spain trying to deal with this problem of perceptual distortion, especially among young women and girls. So when we talk about personal identity, there's a few different things that we talk about here. One of these is life scripts, and life scripts are exactly what they sound out. They are the script we use for life. They are our rules for living and identity, and we often are shaped by others. So what values did you learn from your family, from your culture, right? Are you, is everyone in your family a doctor? And so of course you're going to be a doctor, right? Reflected appraisal, we also call this the looking glass self. And this is the idea that we form our identity based on how others respond to us, not how others think of us, but say we do something. Say, I think I'm a funny person, and I walk into the classroom and start cracking jokes, right? If the class laughs, that's this reflected appraisal that says, hey, I am funny. If the class kind of groans and rolls their eyes every time I try to make a joke, sooner or later that reflected appraisal is going to say, maybe that's not the way I should be defining myself based on this feedback that I'm getting. And this is an old theory coming from Cooley in 1912. We also have something called social comparison. If you've ever heard that phrase, keeping up with the Joneses, this is exactly what that is. Does your house look like everyone else's house? Can you afford the same type of car that your friends have? Here in Colorado, it comes down to climbing gear and bikes, right? Who's got the best? What's the new stuff coming out that you have to have that everyone else does? It's even things like test scores, right? You start asking your friends, hey, what did you get? And how much are you making? And all of those pieces. And we compare ourselves to those people around us, to the rest of society, based on what we see others doing. And then direct definition. There's a few different pieces that come into this. So direct definition is how we are labeled and our behaviors are labeled, right? Being told you're a jerk, being told you're stupid. Those are direct definitions, right? This kid here, we have a dunce cap on, so he's been told that he's misbehaving or the dumb kid in class, right? We do not use dunce caps in classes anymore because they're found to be so emotionally harmful. Self-fulfilling prophecies. So this is when people believe that this is how they are or this is what's going to happen, and basically because of that, they fulfill that prophecy. So there's no way I'm going to pass this test. It's too hard. And because we go in thinking that, we maybe don't study as much as we would otherwise, right? And so then we don't get a great score, and it's like, see, I told you the test was too hard. And although that sounds like a pretty basic example, it's a pretty common one that researchers have found. We also have self-sabotage. Uppers, downers, and vultures are all explained in the text. So these are the people around us who, if you have that cheerleader in your life, that upper, someone who constantly brings you down, and then vultures, remember what vultures do. They're carrion eaters. They prey on the dead and the weak, and they're really they're getting their strength. They're sapping your strength for their own. How we're labeled and the direct definitions applied to us are important because they really do affect us over time. For instance, researchers, particularly in the area of math and science, are trying to figure out why up until about middle school, girls and boys test about the same, and girls, if not a little bit stronger. And then around high school, girls start dropping out of the STEM classes, out of the science, technology, engineering, math. And interestingly enough, what they're finding is that often girls start school stronger, and they cognitively develop a little bit faster, I think is the argument. Don't quote me on that part. But so they start off stronger in school, and so teachers often say, you're so smart, right? And so then when things start getting hard, the girls say, oh, I'm not smart enough to handle this, right? So you hit high school math, you hit high school science, and it becomes a matter of, I've been told I was smart the whole time, now I can't. I'm obviously not smart enough to do this anymore, right? So I'm going to move on to something else. Whereas what they found is often people tell boys, not quite, try harder, right? And so being told try harder, try harder, try harder, you hit the hard stuff and it's like, oh, this is just one more thing. I have to keep trying and try harder. And so interestingly enough, researchers found that those messages that we give to children are pretty significant as they add up over time in how those children think about themselves and what they're able to do. So we often talk about attachment styles in relationship to children. And this is the idea that based on our caregivers and based on the other peoples in our lives affects our understanding and our perception of relationships. And so when we think about, remember, particular others are those people who are specific, particular, important people in our lives. And attachment styles are how we attach or not to particular others. And we form them based on how we grow up, right? Especially in relation to caregivers. So an example here, a quick chart for you. And I have a quick note on the bottom that says the preoccupied that's listed here in the chart is actually listed as anxious in your book. They're the same thing. So just a different use of phrase. So when we think of ourselves negatively and thoughts, the way your partner or the way you perceive your partner thinking about you or the way you perceive your caregiver thinking about you is also negative, then we become fearful of intimacy and we avoid social contact. If we think of ourselves negatively and we think our partner or caregiver thinks of us positively, right, then we become preoccupied with relationships, right, or anxious. And so it's a matter of, this is great, I don't deserve it, this is never going to last for me, right? So we really want the relationships, but we don't think we can achieve them or maintain them. That's different than the fearful, because fearful is relationships are never going to work, I'm not even going to bother, I'm going to avoid it all. So if we think of ourselves positively and we think our partner or caregiver thinks of us negatively, then we become dismissive and says, you know what, I'm too good for this anyway, I don't need this intimacy, I'm way more independent and stronger than that. And ideal is when you think of yourself positively, and when you think your partner or caregiver thinks of you positively, then we become secure in our attachments. We become comfortable with intimacy, and we become comfortable with autonomy. And intimacy is our ability to connect to others and share with others. Autonomy is the idea of we can be independent, do our own thing, right? And so it's healthiest to have a mix of both.